Before we dive into today's episode, I have something truly special to share. Next September, I'll be leading an intimate women's retreat through the south of France and northern Italy, and you're invited. Picture this: mornings exploring the colorful markets of the French Riviera, afternoons sipping wine, and a hotel view with golden Mediterranean sunsets. Whether you love photography, food, or just want to reconnect with your playful creative self, this trip is designed for you. Spots are limited, so if all this sounds like your kind of adventure, please visit tourwithabsolutely.com and look for the tour France and Italy with Crystal. You can also send me a message or check out the show notes. Hey guys, my name's Crystal Kenny, and I'm in love with creating. All things artistic and imagination involved. I'm an American girl who chased her creative dreams all the way to Paris, France, making a living using photography. This podcast takes you inside the stories of all the artsy folks I've met along the way and gives you that extra push to discover your creative gifts. The desire to create is deeply inside each and every one of us, and I give you the tools and inspiration to find a new way of living a more creative life. This is La Vie Creative, the podcast.
So I came here to do a master's in comparative literature and also to do the TAPIF program. I'm not sure if you know of what the TAPIF program is. A lot of Americans do it. A lot of foreigners do it, where they get to teach in schools their native language. And so that was pretty cool. So I kind of got an immersion not only in a French high school, but also I was studying for my master's and writing, and I really wanted to do translation. That was one of my main goals as well. So it was a lot of things that brought me here to France.
And it seems to have all worked out because you're still here.
Yeah. Yeah, I figured out a way to stay. I really enjoy being here and being able to have that distance from my home country and also be in a linguistic environment where I'm learning every day.
Now, your main focus obviously is writing. You're a poet. You were part of the Paris Lit Up group. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. When I finished my degree at the Sorbonne Nouvelle in Bartlett, I decided that I really that I missed my my native language, and I started to get involved with Paris Lit Up, which is an association that does a ton of different things. They host a weekly open mic night. They publish a yearly journal. They also do a ton of events just around the calendar year. And I worked as the poetry editor, one of the poetry editors for that for 2 years. And that was really lovely it's classic magazine work where we weeded through submissions. We contacted poets whose work we found really valuable and interesting. And then we had a launch also. So that was really important and also connected me to the wider Anglophone community here in Paris and in Europe.
Yeah, and I've actually found there is a huge poet group here in Paris. It's like a lot of people think, oh, that's just like the old times, like 1920s, the writers are coming here and being writers and whatever, but it's still very much attracting that writing group, would you say?
I definitely think so. Yeah, I think there's a real pull for it. And actually one of also the reasons that I have wanted to stay is that I work in publishing, and in the States, if I were to go back, I would be working like 40, 45, 50-hour work weeks. But here with a 35-hour work week, which you gotta love, that allows me to focus more on my creative stuff outside of my day job, which is really lovely. And I think that's one of the pulls, right? That the work-life balance here is a little easier.
Yeah, and also just telling people you're an artist or you're a writer here is like a lot more acceptable in a lot of ways, because when you say that in the States, they're like, and what else do you do? How do you make money? There's so many great programs for artists here.
There's a lot of funding also that the government gives, more towards French creatives. It's also definitely not easy, because if you're a freelancer, and tickled with the idea of being specifically a freelance translator for a while. It is super, super hard to find an apartment, to do a lot of things if you don't have like what they call a CDI, which is a steady long-term contract here. It's pretty hard if you don't fall into the lines. But that's another aspect of French life that I think a lot of people realize.
There's a juggling, a balancing act here.
Yeah, definitely.
And you also run a radio show on poetry and translation on World Radio Paris. Talk more about that.
Yeah. One of the reasons why I was really honored to be invited to your show, Crystal, I run a radio show on poetry and translation that basically I get to talk with poets and translators about their craft. And we do, it can be anything from, it revolves a lot around French because a lot of people here who I talk with work with French in some aspect. But I've also interviewed Italian translators or Arabic translators. And it's basically just an excuse to nerd out about poetry and the translation questions that arise when you're translating texts with such music and specificities as poetry.
Oh, that's really cool. I love that. That's super fun. And like, I think about that all the time because, I've read several books that were written in a different language and then translated. And like, how do you find meanings change? Is there a huge change in meaning?
I had one conversation with the poet Jason Stone King exactly on that, actually, about a poem he read, translated from the German by Rilke when he was a teenager. And then later in life, in his 20s, he reread Rilke, but translated by a different translator. And they were such different texts. And he questioned himself. He was like, do I like Rilke? And so it can really make a difference.
Yeah, definitely. I've met Jason several times. He's great. I've interviewed him here too. He's wonderful.
He's a good person.
And talk a little bit about your poetry. So, like, what do you like to write about? What inspires you?
Yeah, I take a lot of inspiration actually from the things I translate. I think that translating from French into English opens me up to a lot of different ways of manipulating the language, ways of thinking about gender, ways of thinking about how culturally different people see the world differently. I write the majority of my poetry is free form. I write a lot about themes on queerness, on being in France and being in Paris. I actually just finished a collection on pole dancing, actually, which is a sport I practice, and how it as a sport is rooted in the patriarchy, but also that it can be transformed into something liberational, especially as a queer person, and challenging those ideas of being seen and transforming ourselves. So that's pretty cool. I think that that's definitely being in France has allowed me to explore that, I guess, a little more.
I love that. I've been watching a lot of documentaries about that, about how pole dancing can be so empowering, and it's helped women connect with like themselves in ways they can't even explain. Like, has that been your experience too?
Yeah, and a lot of people will talk about it better than I do. It is still practiced, in strip clubs. It was born in the strip clubs, and there's a lot of people doing really important work of making sure that we recognize its roots. I think it allows a lot of people to, at least a lot of queer people, to like address this issue of shame. And there's a really wonderful artist whose name is Kelsey Hong, and they do a lot of, they're French, Vietnamese, and they do a lot of stuff around shame and the body and queerness, and they're a pole dancer, and their stuff is amazing. So I really recommend you check them out.
And have you been able to connect your own writing to, outside activities such as pole dancing?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there's so many connections between mediums, like it's just another way of expressing yourself.
Yeah, definitely. It is a form of art in itself, right? It's dance.
And why do people always ask what poetry is? I mean, why do we feel so confused about poetry?
Crystal, that's a really good question. It's funny because the title of the podcast that I run is "This Is Not a Poem." I think going back kind of to this idea that France has kind of opened me linguistically. French poetry kind of has a certain connotation of Baudelaire and Rimbaud and I don't want to necessarily say a little bit dated. It's not contemporary. It's not something that like teenagers today are listening to outside the classroom, right? Or engaging in outside the classroom. And I think that for me, as I have been discovering more and more about French poetry, there's a huge active contemporary scene that has worked a ton to fight against, but also build off of the tradition of the Alexandrin, the 12-syllable form that's very, very common in poetry, in French poetry. And I think that I think that there's a lot of really important work being done in the French scene, and I think that obviously also in the English scene. But it's really cool to see it being done and how it's being done, kind of from an outsider stance, if you will, as someone who learned French only in college and while being here.
Yeah, definitely. It's a fascinating topic. And who would you say poetry is for? Is it for everybody? Is it for
course.
sensitive?
It is for everyone. And I'm not going to say that all poetry is for all people. Like some people just don't like certain poets, or poems, and that's totally fine. But I think you're right to point out this kind of inaccessibility, the reputation that poetry has of being inaccessible. But I think that it's just a question of looking, and also of that's also the work that I'm really trying to do. Like, I love going to slam or spoken word performances, or here in Paris there's a ton of contemporary poets who are reading their stuff on stage, or rapping, like combining rap and poetry, or combining like DJing and poetry. I think it's just such a form that can be performed also in a way that can be super accessible, and get at certain topics that in a direct and smart way that sometimes is different than prose.
Yeah, I completely agree. And when you listen to rap, like you were saying, it is like poetry, it's like a performance of poetry.
Yeah, definitely.
And talk a little bit about when poets are performing poetry, is the performance about the poem or the poet?
It depends on what I think it's the poem, right? Because if you don't know the person who's performing, you don't necessarily know their backstory. So the only thing that you're going to come to it is with what words they say. I'm thinking of specifically Salima Atala Chetaoui, who's a French performer, and they do a ton of stuff with DJing and speaking and poetry, and combining that like on a stage, in bookstores, but also in the nightlife scene. And their poetry speaks a lot about. It's very engaged in the political scene, and I think that that's something also that poetry can do in a way that, like I said, maybe is a little bit more direct, or like more subtle at the same time.
Definitely. No, I completely agree. And it's funny what you were saying, like, is poetry for everybody? Because like for me in the past, I was like, oh, I'm not into poetry, or it's too out there or
Mm.
whatever. But then like my friend gave me a book by Mary Oliver, and I'm just like, oh, I love poetry. This is like you just gotta find what like you connect with.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. That's so funny. I have one of my best friends here is doing a translation from English into French of Mary Oliver's work because she hasn't yet been translated into French. Can you believe that?
That's crazy. It's so wild that I mean, it's so funny that what she can make you feel with so little
Hmm.
words.
Hmm. Yeah.
And talk a little bit about like, let's say poetry for dummies. Like, is there any other people you recommend that people want to get into poetry, but they're not really sure? Like, are there any poets you recommend out there?
English speaking?
Yes, English speaking.
Okay, I have a lot. Dennis Smith is one of my favorite poets. He's there. I think they use he and they pronouns. An American poet who talks a lot about race, about boyhood, about manhood. Um, there's Mary Oliver is also one of my favorites. I just finished reading Taylor Bass, and I can write this out for you, maybe in the links or whatever.
Great.
And yeah,
Yeah, definitely sure.
an American poet who grew up in the South and speaks a lot about that. Carrie Chappell is also a Paris-based poet and translator, actually, who writes a lot about the South as well of the States. Um, yeah, and I think that for me, if I can recommend one thing, is like go watch poets. Like go to Button Poetry. That's it's a YouTube site that assembles like a lot of slam poets and spoken word poets, and just like click on a random like video that you might think interesting and just listen. For me, I that's how I got into poetry, is by the sounds of it and how it made me feel, like not necessarily like being like, okay, like I'm gonna buy this like 20 euro book and then like read the poetry book like a novel, right? Like I think that it's you can go get at poetry in so many different ways.
Yeah, I completely agree about the novel side because even like
Mm-hmm.
with the Mary Oliver book, I just kind of pick it up. It's like having candy or something. It's like, oh, I want a piece of candy. I'm just gonna have a little poem and then like put it down. Like you don't have to just get through the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes I like reading poems twice or like three times and seeing, or at like different moments of the day or like maybe 3 weeks later because they can solicit different feelings at different times.
Definitely, like what you're identifying with, and like it's kind of like a mirror. I mean, anything that we read, right, is like we're just injecting our own life into what we read. That's why, I mean, I don't read reviews and things of my work because I'm like, that's how
Mm.
they were feeling. It's not like it's a reflection of how they read the work. So it's really interesting. Poetry, especially, can do that.
Yeah, yeah, that's for sure.
And talk
Um,
a little bit about your writing process when you're working on a new piece.
yeah, I write what comes first. I think that's also for me what's really important is that I don't force myself, or I'm not writing for anyone but for myself. Um, I like to put music in my ears. That's something that helps me. I know that that's a hot take. um, and I just give myself the time and the space. And if a poem doesn't come in like half an hour and I'm like just writing scratch and it's like, okay, that's fine. I still took that half an hour to get something out that needed to get out. Um, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I love that. No, it's just all about like leaving space, like to let it come. Either it does or it doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that there's a kind of you got to accept like what comes out, like like sometimes I'll read poems before I write, and kind of get me in the mood to like um there's a there's one poet, American poet named Maya, Matteo, Alexis, and they write such amazing things. And sometimes I like get really into like the mood of the language, or if I spoke French the entire day and I'm like, all right, I need to get into my English brain. I'll read their work, because also their work is really experimental. Like they'll like take a Mad Lib and write a poem from that, or like they'll take a list or a quiz and write a poem for that. So it kind of like frees, like it's like when you look at the blank page for me, when I attack the blank page, it's a little bit less, I can really play with it. And that's something that they do a lot. And I try to like prime my brain with reading like 3 minutes beforehand with authors I admire.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's so true. It's all about playing and like just finding a different way of looking at things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And how has Paris changed or affected your work?
That's kind of difficult to say, because I've been here. I basically came here right after I came out of college, and like I said before, you know, with the French language and being able to translate that into English, like that has really impacted me on just a creative level, on thinking of how language can be played with. Also because French as a language has it's a difficult language to learn. I'm sure I'm not the only one who thinks that. And especially with all its grammatical and gender rules, which really made me start questioning, like, all right, like what's the role of gender in language, and like how is it different between French, English, and I speak a little bit of Swedish. Between those three languages, right? What I know. So I think that like the patterns of the languages really helped me ask questions that I think if in English I wouldn't, that those kinds of questions might have not come up, or would have come up later.
Definitely. Yeah, it changes the way your brain works.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And how would you define creativity in your own words?
Yeah. For me, creativity is what comes out of you when no one expects you to do anything. It's what comes out when you have complete liberty to say what you've been wanting to say, but haven't been able to yet. I'm thinking about words, right? Because I work with words, but I know that this can apply to a lot of other. You can apply to dance, for example, or to visual art. When money or pressure or other things are not connected, like someone hasn't told you like write about this, when it comes from really deep down. And for me, that also is something that I found with words, is sometimes when I'm talking, or even, you know, when I'm trying to express an idea, I in front of a friend, or in a professional environment, or in some other context, sometimes I leave the conversation being like, oh, like I wish I would have said that, or like there was something that I felt, like a dynamic that I felt in that wasn't completely right, and I want to write about it, and that's what comes out for me in my creative work. So yeah, I don't know if that makes sense.
Completely. No, that's so beautiful. It definitely makes sense. And like, it's just all about, combining all of that. And what are some resources that have helped you on your journey?
Yeah. Um, workshops, and circles of people who you know and you trust, who can inspire you, but also who can help you along the way. Finding a space, not only that can help you with, your own motivation, but also like having a deadline. Okay, like if you want your work to be critiqued by this deadline, you got to get it in. I know that there's a lot of also creatives who or at least writers, who do workshopping for a little bit, and then they go in and out. So that's one thing that for me at least, I felt that that's worked for that support. Also, like I mentioned earlier, time and space. For me, that's really important. Like maybe that's one of the reasons why I like to use headphones or like listen to music when I write, because that means no one can bother me. And this is my time and my space, and I'm dedicating this time and space for my craft. Other tools that I can think of, sometimes I like to treat myself with a really nice pen.
I like that, a really nice pen. But also what you said about just giving yourself space and time and quiet, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, that can make all the difference.
And what are some future projects you're excited to share?
Yeah, I'm working right now on a translation of a book by Clémentine Beauvais, who is a French writer who has taken one of Baudelaire's poems called La Charogne, which is about a carcass that this poet comes upon while walking on a trail. And in the original poem that Baudelaire wrote, it's not clear whether this carcass is a human or a woman, or if it was just an animal. And this poetry book that Clémentine Beauvais wrote she takes the perspective, she writes it from the perspective of the carcass, and she imagines the life that this woman, who is now on the side of a trail, had. And it's very powerful because it's really rewriting what Baudelaire wrote in a way that's very contemporary, in a way that's feminist, in a way that acknowledges first the beauty, right, of the original poem, but also all the problematic aspects of it, because Baudelaire is with his muse, who happens to be a woman of color. Like, Baudelaire is also like talking down to this person, this carcass on the ground, and like assuming that she was a prostitute. All of these things that are really contemporary issues. And it's really nice to dive into that work and translate it.
I love that you're translating that. I can't wait to read your translation. And would you be comfortable with sharing one of your own poems for the audience?
Okay, this is a poem that is part of the collection, still unpublished, on pole dancing and what that means for me to pole dance in my queer body. It's called 5 Reminders for an Exhausted Body. My bruises mean all the blood beneath heals by eating itself, and time is a dizzy monster waiting for tenderness to turn into tarnish. 2. My bruises mean I flew through darkness, away from the smell of your whiskey breath, towards petals of a particular moon, and got lost in the pull of remembering. 3. My bruises mean I'm half mammal, half hornet, built my home, caught sun silt, pollinated abundantly, with the knowledge I have magic in the pocket of my spleen. 4. My bruises mean the metal melted into a silver liquor I poured straight back into your mouth. 5. My bruises mean I came close to collapse, but my bones fought back. The inside is alive, so alive. A violet pith rises to meet the pink bliss of unbroken skin. And that's a poem you can find in Rogue Agent, published a few months ago.
It's beautiful. I can't wait to read more of your work, and also some of these amazing translations you're doing too.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited to share them with the world.
It was such a pleasure to speak with you today. And where can people follow your work and learn more?
Yeah, I'm pretty active on Instagram, ELL_the rewriter. That's L_the rewriter, because writing is rewriting. And you can also check out my website at ellatherewriter.com. I put my work up there pretty often. So
Fabulous. We're going to share all of that in the show notes. And thank you so much for chatting with us today.
Thank you, because it was a joy to talk with you today.
Thanks so much for tuning in to La Vie Creative. You can find more information on MissParisPhoto.com. And if you enjoyed this show, please feel free to share and spread the word for all my creative guests. We have the power to help them to keep doing what they love. See you next time.